Hello and welcome back to Photoshop CS6 for web designers. Now that we've finished up our PSD file, I want to talk about exporting our images for use in HTML. Now keep in mind this is not an HTML CSS tutorial, this is a Photoshop tutorial. So really I'm just going to show you how to export the images. If you want to learn how to build your page in HTML, you'll have to look into a different course. But for this course, we're going to talk about how to export our images from Photoshop in order to make them useful to put into your website. Now, in the old days of laying everything out in tables in HTML, we would draw a bunch of slices around our images, cut up the image, and then export all of the slices. So we would take a slice of the entire top section maybe, and then we take another slice of this section of the background that's next to the main image here, and then we take a slice of the image itself and then another slice over here to the right, and we just cut that up into a bunch of tiny little images that we would then export as separate images and pull into our HTML and lay everything out in a table. However, using modern web standards, we can create quite a bit of what we see here on the stage in HTML and CSS. So a lot of this we don't need to export as images. However, I do want to show you the basics. We're not necessarily going to export everything that we need for this particular page, but I do want to show you the basics so that you'll know how to export everything you need. So let's start with the background piece. Now the background piece needs to be pretty big. It needs to cover a large area in case somebody has a really big screen with a really wide browser window. It might even be wider than what we're seeing here. So typically when you're dealing with a texture like this, you want to make sure you have a large texture that's big enough to cover an entire screen, even one at a high resolution. So what we would do is take that background image. Right now we have the background image with a hue saturation layer over it. And usually for something like this, I would actually just create a whole new file, pull that texture into that new file, and then export that texture. And here's what that would look like. Here's what the export of it would look like anyways. We would basically minimize all our layers here and turn everything off except for the background. And then even inside the background, we're going to turn off the copyright and the content BG so that all we have is the texture. Now, like I mentioned, we would actually need a much larger file for this texture. We need it to be much wider than it currently is to make sure that it covers up the entire background on a larger monitor. So we would actually just pull in this texture file into a much larger file, make sure it's big enough, apply all the hue saturation, and then just export it for the web. And the way we do that is we go to File, Save for Web, or if you're using a Mac, you can hit Command Shift Option S, or on a PC, it would be Control Shift Alt S to get the Save for Web dialog. Now, one of the things you should be concerned with is file size. If you have a bunch of large images in your web page, it's going to take a while for that web page to load. So you want to keep your images as small as possible. At the same time, you want the quality to look good. So you need to find that balance between file size and quality that works for you. Right now we have this set to JPEG High, which is high quality JPEG. And usually for a texture like this, it's pretty simple and you don't need the high quality there. You'll notice that the estimated file size for this is 84K, but we can probably get that quite a bit smaller. So I'm going to change this to JPEG Medium and see how that looks. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to turn off Convert to sRGB. I don't want this to manage our color for us. But that still looks pretty good as a background image. Some of it might look a little pixelated, but it's really hard to see those pixelated parts. But you can fine tune it as well. Notice that the JPEG High, the quality is set to 60. At JPEG Medium, the quality is set to 30. So if Medium is too low, we can actually try to bump this quality up a little bit until we get it looking like we want it to look. So I might bring that around 43, and you'll notice that around 40, we've cut our file size in half. It's down to 35K, so that's a lot better. Another thing you might experiment with some images is instead of using a JPEG, using a GIF or a PNG. Now if we try to switch to GIF 128 dithered, we see that our file size jumps up quite dramatically here. So we're going to stick with JPEG, and we'll bring that quality back down to somewhere around 40. Still looks good, and it gives us a good file size. So then we would click on save, and then save that wherever you're going to save all of your images for your HTML page. So let's click on cancel. I don't actually want to save that here. I'm going to turn all my layers back on, and let's talk about a few more important options. Now, one of the great new features of some of the latest versions of HTML and CSS is that we can now, let's turn off our guides here, we can now add drop shadows to objects. So we can put shadows behind objects in HTML, so we don't need to worry about exporting this shadow that goes around the outside of our content area. We can actually do that in CSS. One thing we do want to do is we want to cut out our logo here. Now, we don't want to cut out our logo with the texture behind it. We want to get rid of that texture and put this on a transparent background. So anytime you're doing transparency in your images, I want to encourage you to use a ping file. GIF files also do transparency, but they don't handle it very well. And a bunch of older browsers don't really handle ping files very well, but all of the latest browsers do. So generally you don't have to worry about that anymore. So we can go with a ping file. So let's turn off our background because we want to see that transparent background behind the text, and then we'll just crop our image and click on the crop tool here, and then we can drag up the corners and then crop around that text field. And you'll notice it'll snap to the edges of that text layer if you have that text layer selected. I'm gonna go ahead, and this doesn't have to be perfect just yet, so I'm gonna drag out the edges just a little bit to make sure we have some space there and hit return to apply that crop. And then I'm going to go to the image menu, click on trim, and we can trim away the transparent pixels around the edges so that it's a nice tight crop around the text. So we'll click on transparent pixels. We're going to trim away top, bottom, left, and right. Click on OK, and we see that it trims it down even further for us. V to switch to the move tool so that we can actually see what we're doing. And then let's save this for the web. So we would hit Command, Shift, Option, and S. Or again, if you're using a PC, Control, Shift, Alt, and S. Or you can go to the File menu and click on Save for Web. Now you'll notice when we have JPEG selected that it actually throws a white background on there for us. And obviously we don't want that. We want a transparent background. So we're going to change this preset here from JPEG High to PNG 24. So we'll click on that and then make sure that transparency is checked, which it should be by default. And then down here we can see that transparency grid behind the text. Now this probably doesn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyways. That checkerboard behind the text is not going to show up in your final image. That's just there to show us that we have a transparent background there. The only information in the image itself is going to be the text that we see here. So then we would click on save it wherever we want to save it, wherever we're saving our images for our HTML file, and it would be done. So that's how you handle transparent images. You would again save for web, choose PNG 24, make sure that transparency is checked, and then save it accordingly. Okay, so let's click on cancel. I don't actually want to save these. I just want to make sure that you know how to do it, since we're not actually going to build this in HTML. So I'll click on cancel. And then obviously we need to undo some things because we've cropped down our image too far and all we can see is the logo. So I'm going to hit Command Option Z or Control Alt Z a couple times until we get back to where we were. Turn our background back on, and there we go. Now we have a few images here that we could actually use the slice tool for. For example, we have the image up at the top of the mountains in Colorado, and then these 4 images down here. So we can actually use the slice tool to export those images and do that actually pretty quickly. We can export all of them at the same time, and it's especially going to be handy because we can export them all as the same type of image, because these are all, they all need to be pretty high quality images. They need to look good. So we're going to save all of these as probably high quality JPEGs. So again, we're going to pull out the slice tool to do this, and the slice tool can be found underneath a crop tool. So if we click and hold down on the crop tool, we can then go down to the slice tool and cut up our image. Now I'm going to hit Command H to turn on our guides, and our guides are really going to help us out with this. But before we can do that, I want to put some guides around our other images down here We've got guides on the left and right edges. I want guides on the top and bottom too, so that we can really specify exactly where we want this sliced. So I'm going to go back to the Move tool for now, right click on the image of the truck, click on truck so that that layer is selected. And if we drag a guide down from the top right now, it's not going to snap to the top of that truck layer. And this is for a similar reason that it won't snap to the edge of a layer that has a mask on it. Now remember, we don't have a mask on the on-the-road layer. Instead, we have it clipped to another layer. But that layer below the truck layer, this truck clip layer, is the layer that it's clipped to. So if we select that truck clip layer and try to drag out our guides, it should snap to the top and bottom edges. And again, we already have it on the left and right edge. And so that should be the same for Clouds Over Colorado. It's going to use those same two top and bottom guides. So then we can jump down to the flowers layer. So I'm just going to right click on the picture of the flowers. But this time, instead of clicking on the flowers layer, I'm going to go down one layer and click on flowers clip, which is the layer that flowers layer is clipped to. So now our guides should snap to that. So we'll click and drag down for our top guide, click and drag down for our bottom guide. So now we have all the guides we need to do our slicing. So now we can jump back to the slice tool. We're going to draw a slice over the top image here, and it should snap to those guides just fine. And you'll see that when we create a slice that it's actually trying to slice up the entire image. You'll notice that it creates a slice up here labeled 01 that takes up the entire top header. It creates another slice over here on the left labeled 02, and then the one we just created here ourselves is labeled 03. It does another one on the right for 04, and then another one for the bottom middle section labeled 05. Now we don't have to export all of those slices, but we'll get to that in just a moment. For now, let's just continue drawing slices around these four images down here until we have everything we need. Also, as you're doing this, you want to make sure that all of these end up being the same size, and all of these should be 296 by 105. There we go. Okay, so once you create your slices, we could go ahead and export the slices, but another thing we can do is we can come over here to the Slice Select tool and give our slices names. So we can come up to this slice and actually double click on it, and we can give it a name here. So we can name it Colorado and click on OK. We can double click on this slice here and call it Truck. Double click on this one, we'll call it Clouds. Double click on this one, we'll call it Flowers. Double click on the last one and call it Corn. So now we want to export all of these. We're going to do the same thing we did before, Command Shift Option and S to save for web, or Control Shift Alt and S if you're using a PC, or again, if you don't like all those complicated keyboard shortcuts, we could just go to the File menu and click on Save for Web. So then we want to select the slices we want to export. So I'm going to click on the top slice here that has the picture of Colorado on it. We can hold onto the space bar and click and drag around in our image. And then holding onto Shift, I'm going to click on the other four. Shift allows us to select more than one. So we should, if we hold on to space bar and click and drag back up to the top, we should see that we have all four or all five of those images selected. And we want to save them all as JPEG, high quality JPEGs. You can check medium quality to see if it looks good enough, but that pixelates it a little bit and it doesn't look too hot. So let's go back to JPEG high. And then we'll come down here to the bottom and click on Save. Now when we save this, it's going to create a folder called Images, and it's going to save all of these images in that folder. So you would navigate to the folder that you want, and here I'm navigated to the Project Files folder. And notice down here at the bottom we have an option for slices. Now we don't want to export all slices. Remember, it created a bunch of slices for us in between the slices that we created. So we don't want to export all of those. We just want to export the selected slices. Notice there's also an option for all user slices. User slices are the slices that we created ourselves. So we didn't really have to click and select on each slice that we wanted to save here. We could have just selected all user slices from this dropdown. However, I just like to be thorough and make sure that I'm only saving the ones I need to save. So I'm going to click on Selected Slices and then click on Save. Once we do that, if we jump into Finder in the Project Files folder, we can see that it created a folder called Images for us, and in that Images folder, it saved the clouds.jpg, colorado.jpg, corn, flowers, and truck. And remember, these are the names that we gave to those slices. So it saved these images according to those names that we gave to those slices. So that saves us a little bit of time, and using that slice tool can be very powerful when you're working in Photoshop. So that wraps it up for this particular design. I hope you've learned a lot from this, and in the next video we're going to have some final thoughts to wrap everything up. So once again, thank you so much for watching. I'm going to save the file one last time. Let's save it as Fred's Photos 18.psd. So we'll save that and we'll move on with the next video. Thank you for watching.